Thank you, everybody, for inviting me here today. I've been to India once before. That was 25 years ago, when I came with a group of head teachers visiting schools in Delhi and other cities. I'm sure some of you were students then, when I came last time. I sort of recognize a few faces. No, 25 years ago, and everybody said it's a different country now. And it is a remarkable change. Even just driving from the airport here, you can just see the change and the energy and what's happened in India. So it's great to come back, and it's great to, well, actually, hear this morning some of the things I felt when I came last time. One of the things that amazed me visiting the schools was the absolute passion that we had to talk about education with the teachers we met. Everybody was so keen to talk about teaching and learning and to exchange ideas. And okay, I've been with you for 2 or 3 hours this morning, and one thing that's emerged already is your passion to talk about, well, in this case, core skills, but teaching and learning, and ultimately doing the right thing for young people to prepare them for the world that they're going to go into, this rapidly changing world, and that's why it matters so much. So passion, and when I came last time, absolute generosity as well. And so when the Indian teachers visited us in London, we felt we couldn't really be as, I don't know, it was hard for us to just be as generous as you were last time I came. So thank you for the last time, and thank you for this time. I'm going to talk about 2 main things, really, today. I've tried to, in fact, I'm over-prepared, because I looked at all the materials you've had as your training. I was trying to anticipate what we might be doing today. And this morning's been useful because it's given me a sense, oh, yeah, I can keep that, I'll do that, but maybe I need to emphasize this a little bit more. So I've tried to be responsive, so we might jump about a little bit on the screen, but that's just so I can reflect what's emerging. 2 things. You are all agents of change, you're change makers. And I want to just share a model about how you bring about change. Now, it's just a model is a way of thinking about the real world. It isn't the real world, but it can be helpful to have a model in your head. So I'm going to share a little model of how we can think about change that might help us as facilitators be change makers. But most importantly, I'm going to talk about these core skills and how perhaps, we make them teachable. We often say things, don't we, like, oh, to prepare for the future, young people need to be resilient and take risks. And we say all these sorts of things. And you say, okay, that's good. We want them to be resilient. How are we going to teach them to be resilient? Do we say, it's Thursday, it's 2 o'clock, I'm going to teach you how to be resilient now? It sort of doesn't work like that, does it? We have to design learning experiences. This is why I like the phrase, an architect of learning. We have to design learning experiences in ways that allow people to develop resilience, maybe, or stickability, or see the importance of being creative or taking risks and learning from mistakes. So I often use that design metaphor a lot. We've got to be designers. We're not just deliverers like, postmen, postwomen delivering knowledge. We're architects, designing experiences. So I'm going to come with those sorts of thoughts, but not with the answers, because I'm still asking the questions, I'm still a learner, and the schools I work with, not just in the UK, but I've been working with schools in Spain, in Singapore, and various, schools everywhere are wrestling with this. And I'm going to just share some of the things that I've encountered that you might find interesting, that might help you a little bit. So that's the idea. But we're going to start off with this little introduction. I'm introducing you to 2 friends here. One of these friends is called Kiki, and one of them is called Booba. Now what I'm going to ask you to do on a little scrap of paper, you've got loads in front of you like this sort of paper. Could you draw Kiki for me? Just do a little drawing of Kiki, if you would. There they are, Kiki and Booba. I'm going to ask you to hold it up in a minute. No, they look like one of these. You have to, there's Kiki and Booba. This is quite easy. I'm going to do a couple of things today, by the way, some really very quick things. Should you take 10, 20, 30 seconds, okay? And then some things that will be 10 or 15 minutes working in groups. So you're going to have to go with me. So can you hold up to show people on your table? Kiki. Hold your little picture up to your colleagues. Kiki. Well, some of you have done your own. You've been very creative already. Well done. I've got a table full of all original drawings here. One of these is Kiki. Do you know which one is Kiki?
Left.
Put your hand up if you think it's the left as you're looking at it. Is that Kiki? Or who thinks it's the right-hand side? Is Kiki? It's the left. This is an experiment by a psychologist done many, many years ago. And 98% of people think that Kiki is on the left, even if they don't say anything. Why do you think Kiki's on the left?
Because the way you're saying Kiki and Booba.
That was the way I said it. Any other reasons, maybe?
Appears like the cloud appears more like.
When we write, we go from left to right.
Okay, I've got two reasons. Some people say it's the way I said it, Kiki and Booba. Some people here have said, oh, actually, it's maybe connected to the sound a little bit, the name. Yeah, and I think that's one of the main reasons. Kiki sounds quite hard, doesn't it, and sharp and angular, yeah? And Booba sounds a little bit, I don't know, curvy and wavy. I'll give you a copy of the presentation. I'll give one to Arijit to share, okay? So don't worry about taking notes. Okay, that's good. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? 98% of people think that, the sound there. I'm going to ask you now a question, on just a scrap of paper. Do you think a line, if we've drawn a line, could be angry? An angry line. Right, draw me an angry line now. Come on, 5 seconds. An angry line. Share it with the person next to you. Does it look angry to you? Okay, draw me. Can you draw me? Can a line be fluid? A fluid line. Okay, let's draw a fluid line. Fluid line. Fluid line. Even the way I'm saying, a fluid line. Not an angry line. Okay, here's another one. Let me see what Can you draw a shape that suggests, I don't know, explode, something like this? And now draw me a shape that suggests ghost. Ghost. Don't draw a ghost, a shape that suggests ghosts. And have a look. Just share your pictures with the person next to you, just for a moment. The shape that suggests explode, the shape that suggests ghost. Okay, I'm going to now share with you one of the icons of, I suppose, European art from somebody called Picasso. You may have seen it before, but it doesn't matter if you haven't. I don't know if you've seen this picture before. If you haven't, it's even better. Would you say this was a happy picture, or maybe, perhaps, I don't know, an angry picture, a concerned picture, a gruesome picture? What do you think? What made you say, someone said gruesome, that's a good word. Why do you think it might be a gruesome picture?
Everybody is unhappy,
The colors.
sharp-edged knife.
A lot of sharp edges, you can see, somebody said, and
They are one on the other, stepping on each other. There's a shadow.
can anybody see an explosion on there?
Yes.
Where is it?
On the bulb, yes.
Right, tell me what else it looks like. It looks like an eye as well. What else might it look like? A bulb, a light. So there's one object. Could it be three things? It can be three things, because it could be a symbol of an idea or a feeling. This is actually a painting done by Picasso called Guernica, which was a response to the bombing of a village in Spain before the Second World War, when the ruler at that time invited them to test their weapons out on a village in Spain. And this was Picasso's totally angry, passionate, sorrowful response. And within it, you probably can you see sort of ghost-like shapes in there at all?
Yes.
Dream-like shapes? You can see that as well, can't you? You can see anger, you can see ghost-like shapes. People look as though they're crying out for help. The reason I wanted to start with this, first of all, to get you thinking. Hopefully it's got you thinking a little bit. But to make a point of, when people talk about art sometimes, without having the language, it turns into, do you like it or do you not like it? Do you imagine this hanging on your wall in your house or not on your wall in your house? If you haven't got a conceptual understanding of what art could be, that it could be an expression of ideas and feelings and emotions, it could be an historical document, you can't respond properly to art. If you don't know the language of line, texture, shape, color, you can't understand the language of art. And in 5 minutes, hopefully, we're getting a feel for that. The reason I wanted to start with this is, my first point is, we're talking about core skills, and we're talking about people understanding collaboration, creativity, student leadership. It's absolutely important. One of my first messages is to give people the language of learning, the language of core skills, to make that language really visible. Because unless we make it visible, and we think they'll just pick it up in the background as I'm doing this scientific experiment, or they'll pick it up in this background as I'm doing this project on the environment. Of course, you have to have rich context for learning, but you also have to shine a torch on it and make it very explicit and very visible. And I suppose that's where my talk's going to be today, about some big principles that shape the way we think about teaching and learning. So it's two parts. It's going to be how we learn, and I'm actually going to use evidence that we know from education research and from experimental approaches in classrooms to things that work. Not just things that I like doing as a teacher, things that actually work. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about how change happens in organizations, called theory of change. That's the sort of model I want to share with you. So this is the model that you may or may not find useful, but it sticks in my head. We can have a continuum of evidence, like little evidence or lots of evidence on one side. And it's a good way of thinking about things, because if you're persuading people of something, you can talk to their emotions and their feelings, and that's important, obviously. But if you can talk with evidence behind this, you're more likely to think, actually, this is worth doing. This is worth, investing time in. If you imagine medicine, and the way medicine has evolved over 50 or 100 years, we just take for granted, don't we, that there's new treatments, keyhole surgery, or new drugs. And it's the fact there's strong evidence. Say, oh, I'll take that drug because it's been trialed and tested, so it's safe. Or I'll have that sort of form of operation, whatever it may be. We don't just sort of sit there going, oh, we'll put the leeches on, it'll suck the blood out, you'll be all right in a week. We've stopped doing some things. But it's really important for us to be evidence-based in education. And in terms of change, it's also important to look at the research, say what brings about change, what's the evidence that brings about change, and what's the evidence that actually people don't want to change, because change is hard. You just have to take things like smoking. We've known for years that smoking causes cancer. Loads of people who still smoke know it causes cancer. So change in behavior isn't just knowledge. It's no good telling you this is any good. You'd have to have a change of behavior. So when we get into change, we have to think about why people behave as they do. So it's really useful to think about where people get, stuck in their ways. They don't try new things, or what's the motivation to try something new. Certainly we also know that if you want to bring about change in an organization, choose 2 or 3 things to focus on. Don't choose 27 things to focus on, because before you begin, it collapses. And how you align what you're trying to do behind 2 or 3 initiatives. So we know there are certain approaches to change that work and certain approaches that don't. So basically there's 4 zones. So we could be in here, little evidence of what works, little evidence of change. I call that the wishful thinking. That's our wishful, let's just try this. We think it'll work. It's sort of worth giving it a go. But, we can do that. And there's another sort of zone above this where there's little evidence that what we're doing works, but we're actually pretty good at bringing about change in our schools, and we've got everybody doing something. But it turns out, and we have 2 or 3 examples of this, that we had one in the UK where everybody was wearing badges. I'm a visual thinker. I'm an auditory thinker. I'm a kinesthetic learner, whatever it might be. And science has shown us that we're all visual learners. We're all kinesthetic learners. We're all auditory learners. And in fact, the brain, we learn through all our senses. We all learn through all our senses. And the damaging thing was that some people labeled themselves, well, I'm a visual learner. You can't expect me to learn this poetry unless it's a picture. Or I'm a kinesthetic learner. Does that make sense? And so kids were labeling themselves, but it was actually counterproductive to what you wanted. So that's the zone up there. I call that the zone of fads and fashions, because there's no evidence and it gets sort of really embedded into practice. We've got a zone here where there's good evidence, but we don't know how to bring that evidence to life. So that's sort of, the knowledge is not mobilized. We know stuff, and you get pockets of people doing things. Oh, that group are doing it all right, but this lot are not doing anything. So that can happen if we don't mobilize the knowledge. So where we're going to try and get to is strong evidence of what works with a strategy that's likely to bring about change. So I'm going to share examples of those sorts of things with you, really. Let's get in that zone of what I would call the zone of high impact, where we're aligning what we do. And again, it's not me just turning up with these ideas. You will have come across some of these, I'm sure. One of the gurus from New Zealand of high impact strategies in learning is a guy called John Hattie. He's written this incredibly powerful book. It's not one you'd read on holiday, on the right. Visible Learning, a synthesis of over 800 meta-analysis relating to achievement. It's not holiday reading. But in it, he identifies 138 different things we do in schools and rates them as low, medium, or high impact strategies. And why that's interesting is because in schools, the thing that you have least of is what? What's the thing you have least of in schools? Everybody says this to me. It's time, isn't it? If only you had a bit more time. So John Hattie says, if time is the thing we haven't got, let's put our energies into the high-impact strategies rather than the low-impact strategies. So that's an important reason to sort of engage with some of the research, really. Some things work much better than others. So what I've tried to do in this talk today is take some of those high-impact strategies and say, right, let's apply those to core skills. Let's apply those to core skills. And there's other places you can go to if you, again, I'll send the presentation, but the middle thing there is from UNESCO, International Bureau of Education. They're all from different sources internationally. There's some from American Psychologist Society. So it's really about how we learn. In the UK, we have a thing called the Teacher Toolkit. And what they do is create a sort of league table, if you want to, of effective strategies. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's worth visiting. But you can see, if I look at the top, feedback comes out as a really worthwhile thing to get right. If we get feedback right, kids make up to 8%, 8 months progress more than if we don't maximize the use of feedback. So this is a way of looking at the things that give you high-impact strategies. It's interesting, metacognition and self-regulation. I started with that little activity because it was really about metacognition. We were thinking much deep, what's going on here? Can I make this line there? We talked about symbolism. We were taking people above the day-to-day. So here's what I'm going to talk about, these 5 things. These are at the heart of my talk. Making it visible, which hopefully we've made that point with the art. Sharing notions of quality. What does good look like? Because if you don't know what good looks like, it's very hard to work towards good. This is a real favorite of mine, the third one, activating thinking. We often think, what activities should we do with kids? What activities? Not how will this activity make kids think, because we learn when we think. So when I used to visit schools, I'd sometimes see kids doing art, and I'd be sticking, I don't know, pasta shells and spend an hour and a half doing a lovely painting with pasta shells over it. And you think, actually, that was an activity that kept people busy for an hour and a half. And I don't think they actually did any thinking whatsoever under the, why does this pasta keep falling off the paper? You know, so you can create activities that make people look busy, often make them look as though they're busy, but there's not much learning going on. So activating thinking is going to be something I'm talking about. I've just mentioned feedback, growth through feedback, and making connections. So we're going to try and quickly run through those. Some I'm going to stop and give you an activity. Some I'm going to just skip over because you'll get the idea straight away. Is that okay? And I'm going to show you, this is a page from the book that you are going to get handed out tomorrow, or have you got it today? You got it today. And it is the lesson plans. And I want to show you how Arijit told me that you felt you needed help with teachers to actually be better at coming up with lesson plans and strengthening the lesson plan. So what I've tried to do is map these 5 principles into the planning process. So we'd be saying when we're looking at learning intentions, right, how are we going to make this really visible in this lesson? How are we clear what success looks like? Because if we can't articulate what good looks like, it's going to be really hard to offer feedback to students to get towards good. So I'm going to show you how those principles will strengthen the planning process. So we're going to begin with making it visible. These are all examples from schools. So I'm going to take my jacket off a moment. I bet the microphone's in the pocket, so just bear with me. This was a school with very young kids, and they were talking about, actually, we want to start introducing the language of learning, the language of critical thinking, the language of creativity into our classrooms. And they did it through, I thought it was really quite an interesting way. They did it through what they call creatures of learning. These creatures are totally brilliant at finding things out. What do you think they do? If they were brilliant at finding things out, I'm going to just mock this up. Pretend you're the kids, okay? What do you think they do, these creatures that find things out? Shout something out to me. What do they do if they're brilliant at finding things out? They'd be observing, walking around, taking notice of things, looking carefully. Yeah, examining observation skills. They'd begin to they'd explore, they'd start to making connections. Would they care about accuracy? No. They wouldn't. If you're saying you're good at finding things out, we're doing a scientific experiment, I think we would want them to be, possibly. Yeah. But they wouldn't. Initially, they wouldn't. Okay, that's good. They came up with this creature, and it was called the Inquirosaurus, I think. And you can see in its tentacles, it's got a magnifying glass because it looks really closely. It's got a ruler to say, actually, it measures things. And I think the magnet was this notion of thirst for knowledge. Oh, they're really keen. They're attracting knowledge to them. So they basically used a daft creature to get young kids thinking about this and said, actually, I'd like to be like the Inquirosaurus. I'd like to be like that. And they came up with I can't remember what it was called, the creative thinker with a bulb on its head and, generating new ideas. And it was just a really nice way. And they put the posters up around to bring that language into the classroom. Another really nice thing I got from another school was each year they picked 5 books that they were working on. This is a sort of well-known children's book in the UK called Percy the Park Keeper. Not often used in schools, but occasionally used in schools. But Percy notices everything. He loves nature, and he's looking at detail, and he's doing this sort of thing, and he's a problem solver as well, Percy the Park Keeper. So they use their books to say, when have you been like Percy? When have you been like, I don't know what another one character was, and they would say, I've been like Percy because I looked closely and I solved this problem. And what was nice, the reason I put this example in, is they shared this with the parents, and the parents had little cards at home. And if they felt at home the kids had shown interest or solved a problem, they'd write on the back of the card and send it into school so that the teachers were getting the sense that these kids were valuing the skills at home as well. And it was bringing the parents into the discussion about why these skills matter. So, but it was also to do with the books they were taking home. So it felt connected to literacy and felt connected to loving books. So who was it said earlier about some of your schools are very focused on literacy and numeracy? You know, it's another way of making the bridge there. Does that make sense? The third example I've got is from Northern Ireland, who've been introducing what they call personal and thinking skills. And they just made posters about these are the sorts of languages we want to, words, the sort of language we want to see in our classrooms and in our planning. Now, if you're doing this with teachers, I'm not going to ask you to do it now because there's other things I want you to do. You can give people a blank one. What would be the word you'd want to see if you were talking about working with others, collaboration and teamwork? Just let's have one off each table. Okay, what's some words that should go on this poster? Empathy? Something on here? Listen, respect, you're getting the idea. Contribute, participate, join in, wait for your turn, take to whatever it may be. Basically, again, get the vocabulary out there, make it visible. Really nice activity to do for people being introduced to these areas. You know, let's make it visible. Now, I personally was working in a school recently, and the school, I think this is about making the most of opportunities, moments for change. They were looking, I don't know if you'd have similar stuff in your schools, I'm sure you will, where they offered merit points to students or house points when they'd done particularly well in jobs, you know, in their schoolwork. And they were involving students in their own learning, and they did a little questionnaire to students about what do you think about your learning and what do you think about our merit system. And they were really surprised. What came back is we think it's rubbish, the merit system. It just doesn't work at all. And it doesn't work for these reasons. Some teachers hand them out regularly. And, you know, Mr. Mills over there, he hasn't handed one out in 3 years. So if you're in Mr. Mills's class, it's rubbish. You don't get any merits. And if you're in that class, you get loads of merits. So there was this sense of injustice, first of all. And then the second thing was they said, and also the thing you get them for. You know, somebody got a merit for doing this fantastic piece of research that looked at different perspectives and came to a conclusion, you know, 2 or 3 week bit of research. And someone in the class got a merit for coming up with the right kit. They had their ruler and pen with them. And they says, that's not fair either, is it? So they basically unpicked this scheme that's supposed to motivate kids, and in fact what was happening was it demotivating them. So there's a sense, you talked about action research as a change methodology. You know, the first step in action research is what's currently going on. But it gave us a great opportunity to link the skills and the development of core skills or thinking skills, whatever, to their merit system. Now, I'm going to give you a quick glimpse of this, and this is your first 5-minute activity. I'm going to ask you to come up with what you think on your table would be 5 desirable learning behaviors if you were going to give a merit point for something around core skills. Look, I'm going to give you a quick glimpse of this. So they said shows initiative, showed commitment and drive, or showed clarity and precision in communication. So they came up with those. And they also, this was a secondary school, they started giving these things points. So an Einstein point is what it was called if it was very insightful or very creative. And then we've got a guy in the UK who's a designer who designs hoovers, a thing called a Dyson, which is a type of hoover, and he's regarded as a guru of entrepreneurship and design. So their creativity award is very much around a Dyson point or something like this. So I'm only going to give you, this is a quick one, right? Not a long one, about 3 minutes, just to come up with 5 things on your table that would be a desirable learning behavior if you were designing a merit system for core skills. Have you got one?
Yes, applying.
So you give them a point for being reflective. Just write what you'd see them do. All right, that'll do. This is just, again, a little taster activity, but again, a nice activity. it almost picks up on the activity you were doing just before lunch. What does it actually look like? Yeah? Can you all come back together now? I'm going to start with the table at the back. Could one of you just really loudly shout out, we would give a merit point for, listen up everybody, nice and loud.
Capacity to collaboration, imagination and individual thinking.
Just one I want from you, collaboration. Unpick it a tiny little bit, so you can have a collaboration point for.
So, for example, a group of children being able to work together to get the task done, demonstrating that they're listening to each other, suggesting, taking on each other's suggestions.
Okay, so that's really a nice explanation. So, collaboration point for active listening, taking on suggestions, and working together. So you're actually making it really invisible, so they can understand what that point is for, that desirable learning behavior. Someone at this table. Elaborate the point if you can as well. Tell everybody, not me.
So we said divergent and convergent thinking.
Okay.
So unless the brain is not thinking like many solutions, it's not going to be able to converge onto one which would work the best. So
that's a nice idea, because you're sort of, particularly that notion of, it's a divergent, convergent thinking, but for generating more than one idea. The idea that it's important to not just go with the first thing that comes into your head. Let's try a range of options. So again, it's a way of making it visible to the kids themselves. Yeah? So they're getting a point. Let's have one off this table.
From this table, I think readiness, because no learning can take place unless the learner is ready to take it on. So there has to be adaptation, and he has to be ready for that learning experience.
Okay.
So there has to be a pre-task to it before we start.
Let's just imagine then saying, I'm going to give you a point, you're a learner, I'm giving you a point for being ready. What would I see if they were ready?
They want to learn, so they're enthusiastic.
So they're attentive?
Yes, they're attentive, they want to learn, they do activities, yes.
Okay, so we're getting that sense that they're ready to go, yeah? They're tuned in, they're attentive. They've perhaps done some background reading, so that's why they're going to get a readiness award. We'll do one more.
Students can become problem solvers, so they can apply the knowledge which they've achieved to the real life situations, and they can solve the problems.
That's a really nice one, because you're not just saying the word problem solver, you're saying you're getting a problem solver point because you've taken this learning and applied it to a real life situation. So it's the application, and that's going to be really important. I'm going to come to that point of connections, because one of the hardest things in education is they call it transfer of skills from one context to another context. So if we make those connections very visible, it helps them create mental maps or schema of why this learning matters, and I can connect it to this real life situation, or I can connect it to that problem, or this thing I learned in maths about, I don't know, data handling, I can apply in science. Oh, I can apply when I read the news about something that was on the news last night. So we've got to make, for young kids, those connections very explicit. Does that make sense? Okay, that's your first one, making it visible, making skills visible. I'm going to come back to you on another chance, okay, there? Because I don't want to labor this point, because we've got lots to get through. So thank you for bearing with me on that. There's just so you can have a quick glance at those. You're going to get the slides, so don't worry too much. You can feel free to take photos if you want. I'll smile as much as I can, but you will get the slides, and they'll be probably sharper than the photographs. I like, it's resilience, sustained effort, and persistent. You persisted. That's why you're getting the point. That's what I mean. Make it visible. One of the things that there's somebody called Professor Carol McGuinness from Northern Ireland, and her life's work is about thinking skills. I might mention it at the end. And she talks about different ways that we do it. Do we just have an immersion technique where we just teach normally, we're aware of the skills and we plan it in, but we never foreground it, it's just happening in the background? Another one is that some people do is we actually have skills lessons. We're going to have a lesson today on creativity and a lesson on this. But her preferred and evidence-based approach is an infusion approach, which is where we do teach traditional subjects, of course, but woven in like DNA is the skills going through it. But she says it's important to make it visible, but occasionally, and somebody said it this morning, imagine an old-fashioned tape recorder or one of these play things you have on a computer where you press pause. You pause the lesson and say, how are we learning here? What sort of thinking is going on here? Who's generating ideas? So you're actually pausing it could be a science lesson, a maths lesson, a physics lesson, but you're pausing the lesson to foreground and make visible the thinking or the skill, and then you take the pause off and carry on with the lesson. So the notion that you punctuate your teaching with these pause moments, these reflection moments. So that's another way to make it visible. I'm going to go on to sharing quality. You've talked a lot today, and you've held posters up about what it might look like. It's really important, this is the second principle, that we know what good looks like. If we can't articulate what good looks like, it's hard to work towards it, and it's certainly impossible to offer feedback if you've got no notion of what progression and good looks like. So somehow we have to find ways of sharing good with the students and having good in our own heads, okay? And again, I'm quoting Carol McGuinness here, and I'm quoting her because, as I say, it's her life's work. She talks about this notion of teachable or teachability, and she says we often go around talking about, yes, we'll teach them decision-making, skillful decision-making, that's what we want. But she says that's too high a level. Like problem-solving is too high a level. Communication is too high a level. We have to deconstruct what's there in order to make it explicit and teach it. So I put down this little quote here. Yes, it's useful to break down generic skills. Again, I'm going to ask you to invite answers. This is about skillful decision-making. What's involved? Not just, oh, you're a decision-maker, but you're a skillful decision-maker. Again, don't be worried about being right or wrong. Give me some sorts of things that you think might be associated with skillful decision-making. Right, weighing up the pros and cons. Yeah, that's definitely one of those things.
Diagnosing the situation, current.
That's a really good one as well. What's the actual, let's diagnose the current situation, the problem, and define it. Looking for evidence to support one particular view or not, that's really good as well. Sorry, somebody just whispered there before I come to you. Long-term effect, was it? So it's anticipating the future. So if we made this decision, what might happen in the future? Let's just, you were next. Pull in, yeah, on a previous experience. What happened when this sort of thing happened before? You know, use that. You had something? It was the same one?
And we can also have a social model that what strength we already have, which can actually further strengthen into teachable things, taking the ideas from the existing strength area of our system.
Okay, I think, are you talking about generally for teaching decision-making there? Yeah. So in terms of being good teachers of decision-making, we'll be thinking in our own lives
With what we can
where we've made decisions before or kids have made decisions, plugging it into what we've known. There's one other thing I'm hoping to get from you, because examining alternatives. Right, let's just hold it there, because I'm just reveal, as that, you know, in the style of, there's one I made earlier. Carol McGuinness talks about you've got to break down these things. It's just far too generic up there. Because when you break it down, you can teach it. Or you can certainly, you know, they talk about the importance of knowledge. Because the more stuff you know, the easier it is to learn new stuff. Knowledge does matter. But there's all sorts of knowledge. Skills matter as well. But there's what they call procedural knowledge. You know, the way you set about something. So it's not a fact in that sense, knowledge. It's knowledge about how you approach a problem. So it could well be that equipping people with the knowledge of ways, methodologies and approaches or procedures is really powerful for them. So she would say this, identifying the options. In fact, she's missed some of yours out. They were much better about diagnosing the current situation was really important. But identifying the options. So I've got these options, pros and cons. You said that as well. This is skillful decision making. So first of all, can you say to the kids, I want you to come up with 3 or 4 options before we decide. You know, you're teaching them what are the options. That's what's in their head. That's what they walk away with. Now think about the pros and cons. And these are 2 that you came up with as well. What's happened from the past, the evidence that supports this. evidence that doesn't support it, and someone said, look to the future. I've got a tool I sometimes use called the ripple effect. You know, you throw a stone in a pond and ripples go out, and I use that metaphor to say, right, you've suggested this action. Let's imagine the knock-on effects as this goes out. And sometimes you think, oh, that's a great idea, but 2 or 3 steps out, actually, there's all these unintended consequences we didn't expect. But teaching them about a tool called the ripple effect tool is such a powerful thing for the rest of their lives, because they don't jump into the first idea. So I'm going to talk about tools later, because I think they really matter. And then you come to your choice. Does that make sense, the point here? So this is about quality. This is about quality. Now, this is the next task you're going to do, and it's a 5-6 minute task, this one. She talks about shallow and deep learning. So this is about, I suppose, critical thinking, but she's talking about judging the credibility of a source of information. How do you judge the credibility of a source of information? Do you know, this was really hammering home to me when we were watching our TV news about the American election. And it felt like to us that we've gone into this strange world somewhere where truth and evidence just doesn't seem to, you know, it just was treated with, oh, who knows, you know. And so people were making claims, all sides make claims about different things. And what struck me is there's been some research done that young people read it on the internet and think it must be true. It's on a website, it must be true. So we need to develop this critical thinking around judging evidence, because if there was one example of false news stations, so people making up news stories, posting them on what looked like newspaper-type pages, but they were being picked up by credible news organizations and being spread. You know, so that's a hard world to live in, isn't it? So you've got to get them to think about, so they talked about this, skillful learning, which was around considering the authority. Who's saying this? You know, is it someone trying to sell me something, or is it a, you know, piece of research from a university? Now, ask who's saying it. And people who don't use skillful thinking would be just taking everything as source on its face value. I must believe that. I'm going to reveal this one and ask you to do a different one, just to give you a feel of how this works. And again, the point I'm making is share quality. Share what good looks like. So this is an attempt to share good. So compare the viewpoint with other sources. Is it just one person saying this, or lots of other people saying something similar? Consider the intention of the person saying it. You know, ultimately, are they salespeople trying to get you to buy something? Are they people with an ideology who are trying to persuade you that their view of the world is the right view? You know, maybe it's a religious type thing, or philosophy, or ideology people are promoting. Who knows? Or political things. You know, if you know what the intention of the person is, it helps you think about, oh, right, that's what's behind this story. And we often talk, don't we, not just about skills, but about dispositions. And we'd like to see people that are truth-seeking, that are open-minded, are willing to suspend judgment before jumping in. I want to weigh this up before I jump in. So there's a disposition about learning too. And then you can just guess the opposite. No cross-referencing, little consideration of who's saying this, whatever it might be. Fails to consider what the intentions behind the person might be. And the disposition that you don't want to encourage is lack of rigor, unquestioning acceptance of anything that comes their way, or closed to alternative perspectives. So it's not just about the skill, is it? It's about the attitude. So I'm going to ask you, as your first longer task today, is to do one of these, but could you do it around working collaboratively as a team, and just come up with 5 things that will say this is skillful, or this is deep collaboration, and this is shallow and not very good collaboration. So as a table, you'll have to draw one out, a little grid like this, and see if you, I'm going to give you 6 or 7 minutes. Is that okay? Okay. You didn't nod, but I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm going to blame you if it goes wrong. So let's, I want you to think about skillful collaboration, deep collaboration, or shallow collaboration. So that's what the task is. If you're stuck, on your tables, I've just put some little instructions about various bits and pieces, or how you might grow the table out. I'll come round and support you. Okay, 7 minutes on this one. 7 minutes. Okay, I've just done a quick walk around the room, and there's some really nice ideas emerging here. Can I just have do you think this is a good discussion point, the idea between shallow and deep? Yep. Does it help to pull out the sorts of things you want to see when you talk about quality? I think it does, because every single table has said something very interesting about, you know, shallow and deep learning. Let's just start with perhaps your table. Can I get the microphone? We'll say this one over the microphone so everybody can benefit from each other's wisdom. Right, everybody, can we just listen? Because what's going to happen now, just before you start, each table's only going to say one thing. Don't tell me everything you've come up with. I just want one thing from each table, and then we'll have 5 nuggets of wisdom from each table, okay? But obviously, don't say the same thing as the first table. Let's have an example of shallow and deep in terms of teamwork. Share it with everybody now.
Okay. What we have written is 1 point, as you have told us to tell us. It's making everybody's voices heard would be in deep collaborative team building. And the superficial collaboration would be one person dominating the group.
Okay. How do you feel about that? Does that feel a good thing to do? Why? That's great, thank you. Why is that important, do you think, in good teamwork? Why is it important to get everybody's voice heard?
Different perspectives. Work is to give platform to everyone to contribute. Only it's a collaborative work. If one person is dominating, this can never be a collaboration. And again, it's one person-centered learning.
Okay. There's another, that's really true. Everybody's voice needs hearing.
Perspectives you get?
Absolutely, because sometimes when you get different voices, if that voice is never heard, first of all, it might be that nugget of an idea that will transform what's going on. It might be a massively powerful thing. But the other thing that happens with creativity, funnily enough, is you can connect 2 ideas together if they come.
Yes.
So you'll find...
You get very limited ideas every time, and you might have a lot of other effective and most workable idea which has not got chance to come on surface.
That's right, to flourish. That's good. What about this table? One from this table? And share it with the room, not just me.
In superficial, we've written dilution and divergence in result-oriented work. And in skillful, we have written that there's continual improvement and sustainable result.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to just say a little bit more about that so I can don't worry, we're just exploring ideas here. Just give me it in very everyday language. What would I see a bit more?
We are looking at getting the work done with a deadline in mind, and it has to get over when it's a superficial collaborative team. But whereas when you're looking at skillful teams, we are working to continuously improve our work and sustain that quality continuously.
So there's something about a quick fix or just a short-term goal,
yes,
and a deep,
yes,
sustained change.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's an interesting point as well. So there's something about there. Sometimes in a task, it might be that in order for the episode to go on, you do have to come to a decision. But I think your point's about the culture of the classroom. Yeah. You want a culture where this isn't a one-off thing we did last week or 2 months ago. This is what happens in our classroom. We sustain collaboration.
It's going to stay with us.
That's a really interesting point, the culture thing. Let's all stick together with the ideas. Let's have one more off this table.
Okay, we've taken a superficial as task divided at random. Anybody's given anything.
Okay.
And deep as task is distributed as per skill sets.
Okay, that's really interesting. Did you get that point over there? About roles? And you just willy-nilly, just randomly do it? Or is there a sense that you divide the roles up? Susan, you said something interesting about roles, which was that notion of sometimes shifting the role to this.
So we were talking about the fact that teams, in order for teams to work really well, you need everybody to be really effective. And sometimes people can be in roles where maybe they're not performing particularly well. And sometimes when you shift roles, you know, either maybe you've been stuck in a role for 25 years and you're actually quite bored, or maybe you're in a role that doesn't suit your skill set. And sometimes if people can move around roles within a team, then they perform more highly, so your whole team performs more highly.
I think that's really important with young people as well, because if you do have some people who seem to be, I don't know, very eloquent and able to lead, are you just going to always let them lead? Or are you going to say sometimes, actually, there's other kids in here who need a chance to be leaders too? So in fact, you as the great leader, I'd like you to be the note taker for this one. You take the notes. So you actively shift the roles to make sure everybody is developing skills. One more off this table, and then we'll come to your table.
In terms of skillful, we looked at the idea of hearing versus listening. You know, we all say we're listening, but are you actually hearing that person, or are you're listening so that you can make a response? So we talked about tactics like asking someone to paraphrase what their neighbour says to ensure they're listening actively. And then under superficial, we looked at the tendency if it's like, oh, let's just put this to a quick vote without diving down.
Okay, that's a really nice one, I think, that whole notion of active listening. And those little techniques about, you know, play back what you think you've heard, or work in a team, and don't tell me your own point, tell me the points of the person on your right, to make you actively listen to what's being said. And I think you can create that culture in a classroom as well. Has any more people want to just share one here?
So in skillful, we thought being critical and analyzing before accepting different points of view.
Okay.
And when you look at this side, superficial, just accepting and passing without challenging or questioning.
Okay, so it's almost infusing your collaborative work with critical thinking, really, isn't it? Because the other thing about skills and these things is we put a label on them and talk about them, so it makes it possible to talk about them. But in real life, it's like a Venn diagram. They're all overlapping all the time, aren't they? You could be thinking critically and collaborating, and there's a creative spark because two people have said something, oh, I never thought of it like that before. So, you know, it's important that we make that point clear as well to young people. It isn't all siloed, the skill stuff. Just before we move on from this one, I'm going to just take you back to this bottom bit, because I think this is about culture and climate for learning. The dispositions that these skills will nurture. Because we talk about knowledge, skills, but also attitudes and dispositions. So what would be some positive dispositions that you'd expect to develop in skillful collaboration? Yeah, flexibility, maybe recognizing that different people can bring different things to it, so flexibility. I think that's really important. Being open to others, respectful. That's an interesting point as well. The value of the collective. That they're often, or the wisdom of the crowd. I think there's a book and all this stuff. You know, let's generate as much value from it. So think about the dispositions that you're trying to enact in the classroom as well. So that's really important. Team spirit, absolutely. Respect for others. That's perfect as well. Being empathetic. We all feel, don't we? Even in this room today, nobody would be shouting something out and putting their hand up if the climate was, I'm going to look like an idiot if I say something. You know, somehow this morning, you sharing, and we're all beginning to, you know, get things right, get things wrong. We're trying to create a climate of participation where it's okay to just float an idea. It's okay to try things. You know, that doesn't just happen. You have to create that climate sometimes, particularly if the climate has never been like that. It's all about being right or wrong. People are afraid to put their hands up. Non-threatening, trust, supportive environments, recognizing that we all learn through making mistakes, the value of thinking out loud. You know that phrase, thinking out loud? I might not be right, but let me just run this past you, see what you think of it, and not being afraid. So these are all attitudes and dispositions that you create in climates in schools. So it's interesting to do that. I'm not sure whether we should have a coffee break now or after the next activity. I'm going to show you a video, actually, and then we'll have coffee. This is an example of, you know, I mentioned action research, what's currently going on in your school at the moment before you bring about a change. I'm going to give you a little example. This is again from a really high-performing school, these things I'm going to show you next. In the UK, primary schools, they take tests and they get put in a local area into some sort of league table and say, oh, you're doing really well as a school, you're in the middle, you need to improve. There's you know, very public. Now, this was a school that was doing really well. It was always near the top of any league table, so their results were brilliant, okay? But on their school mission statement, in the aims, they said, we're trying to create independent learners who are confident and can manage their own learning and all this. So that was the aim of the school, and they were doing great with results. They had no reason to question anything about their practice. We're great. But they were professional, and they did question their practice. They did ask what's going on. And one of the things they did, they invited young children to talk about their learning, them reflecting on themselves as learners. What does good learning look like? And this is the stuff they got back when they asked them there. A sensible learner looks sensible by listening, arms folded, hands in laps, legs crossed, fingers on lips, and arms and hands and feet, as quiet as a mouse. Here they are, top of the league table, being brilliant. This is what learning is in my school. What is it? Sitting on bums, hands crossed, ears listening. And the third one, doing what the teacher tells them, looking in dictionaries. Now, and obviously there's a name of the one, Josh. I think Josh was probably the teacher's pet, where, you know, that's what, if we were all like Josh, it'd be great. Now, this was a group of professionals reflecting professionally, and they were horrified. They were horrified to think, what's going on with the climate we're creating in our classrooms, that these learners are not the sort of learners that says on our aims. They're not inquisitive, they're not collaborative, they're not doing this sort of stuff. So they really shifted their culture in the school. In fact, all that creatures of learning stuff came from this sort of place. Let's make the language of learning visible. Because if they're going away thinking it's about sitting on bums with fingers on lips, it's not about any of the stuff that we talked about. So they started to make it visible. And they took some lessons from the little video clip I'm going to show you now from a school called the Wroxham School, where they had a whole initiative called Learning Without Limits. And they brought right to the front of their discussion, what is it to be a learner? So let me just show this little video. I hope the sound's on. And then we'll have a coffee. Can we turn it up a bit?
The grid method, it's got the way it's set out in words. It's in grids, yeah? And the column method's in columns.
Well, it's a way of working out a multiplication sum that's bigger than repeated addition. Yeah.
Now, having that culture about maths, there's not one way to do it. There's various ways, and it's up to the child to find out the way that suits them, that they'll really be able to remember.
The teachers let us choose the level of difficulty that we feel most confident with. So we call these challenges.
In Wroxham, we challenge ourselves.
We always choose our own challenges.
Yeah.
So your teachers don't have to go like, you have to choose this challenge, you can't choose this challenge.
It's the challenge we feel that's right for us.
So every day we do different learning, so we can't always choose the same challenge, because you don't know if it will be too easy or too hard for you.
I thought I should start off on challenge 2 to get confident and then move on to
yeah, because challenge 1 was a little easy for us.
Yeah.
They will make that choice based upon their own reflection on what they can achieve and how they need to make that next step forward, and we constantly look at how we can challenge ourselves, and it's part of the ethos of the school, from Alison, the head teacher, right down to the children, well, I should say from the children right down to their head really, because the children are focused.
We choose an easy one. It's not just it's not challenging ourselves, and it's not getting better at our learning.
Yeah, it's not learning. Yeah, you just whiz through and you won't learn anything, and then if you go on a really hard challenge, then you will sort of learn stuff, but then you'll never get the answer right because it's like really hard for you.
And when I speak to teachers, talk about learning about limits, so two things usually pop up. One of them is, don't the children always go for the easy challenge? And the second one is, don't they always go for the challenge their friends choose? And genuinely, the children, 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, will choose a challenge that's right for them.
We don't choose the same challenges as our friends. We do this challenge that is right for us, and if it's too hard, we go down a challenge, and if it's too easy, we go up a challenge.
You don't want to choose your friend that's going to talk about a movie.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Or like what you're doing outside at break time, at lunchtime. You have to choose someone who you're friends with, but you get unsensible with them.
Me and Eden, we were working together because we were on the same challenge and Eden was getting a bit confused, and I was just like helping her, like, does this number go here? Is this the answer? And we was just checking with each other, but no copying.
Don't really copy anyone's work because you won't learn either. You're just copying it, and then the teacher thinks that you can do it and doesn't. And then he won't give you some help.
We all know that we shouldn't be copying other people's work.
And we know if they copy, they just don't know like what the answer is, and they won't get better.
Plus, anyway, what if someone got it wrong and you copied it? You're getting the same mistake.
Yeah. If the other person's not feeling very confident, the other person
say, how do you feel about doing this, or what do you think you should do now? And you help them along, but you don't just give them all the answers.
I think within a classroom, ideas around learning and trying to create a culture of trust and openness and humility and empathy, it's got to be modelled by the teacher from day one. And if the teacher's not modelling that behaviour, then how can you expect the students to reflect upon their own learning?
You're not a robot and you're going to get things wrong. Yeah. If you got every answer correct, Mr. Davey would probably be more surprised than if you got every answer wrong.
They don't say, oh, you're on challenge 1 and I'm on challenge 5. Ha ha.
Yeah.
And they're like really positive. They're really supportive. Yeah. So they help us with our learning.
When other people challenge themselves, you really want to challenge yourself as well because they inspire you.
It's getting away from this idea of fixed ability, where a child has a fixed ability, but more, what can we do to enable the child to progress and to progress and to progress and to progress, and not put any limits upon their learning by setting by ability, or saying, okay, you're going to do this challenge, you're going to do that challenge.
Usually in challenges, I would go from challenge 1 and probably only get on to challenge 2, but today I'm really proud of myself because I started on challenge 1 as usual, but I finished on challenge 3.
Creating that culture of trust where it's okay to hold your hands up and say, do you know what, I need a bit of help with this, or I'm not very confident with this. And if the teacher models that, the teaching team are modelling that, the staff are modelling that, then the children are straight away going, no, this is a safe place to do this. How can we ask our children to be open and reflect if us as teachers aren't doing it? It smacks of hypocrisy, and it's just not going to work. Yeah.
Thank you for watching!
What sort of things do you just see in that? Yeah?
Also value building, of trust.
Absolute trust. They talked about, if they don't get it, I explain what you've got to do, but no cheating, no copying, you wouldn't be helping. And they're even saying, no point copying because the teacher wouldn't see if you were making a mistake. So what about their attitudes to making errors? I love that last quote, don't you? Forget his name, but Mr. X would be more surprised if I got them all right than if I got them all wrong. Because challenge mattered, didn't it? This notion of risk-taking, pushing yourself. They talk about the zone of proximal development, your comfort zone. You've got to get into that zone to learn. And if it's too easy, it's not challenging enough. If it's too hard, you come down. So these are kids developing the language of learning. I'm going to pause there now. I love the film. These are young kids who are articulate about the skills of learning there, the skills of collaboration, the skills of thinking. And it can happen. And if it can happen like that with, 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds, it can certainly happen with 18 and 19-year-olds and 17-year-olds. We can do it. So let's pause there, take a break, and I'll see you in about 20 minutes or so. Thank you. Here's where we're up to. So far, just to sum up, these are the 5 principles that I'm talking about today. making it visible, sharing quality, activating thinking, growth through feedback, and connecting learning to life and learning. I just want to say a few words about, and it's been powerful in my mind, between what's called principles and methods. And I think when you're a trainer, it's a really important distinction to get into your head. I'm sure you've got it, but let me just talk about it for a moment. If you've got a principle inside your head, I don't know, like sharing quality, for example, that really matters for learning. You can think of a method, you can think of 2 methods, you can think of 3 methods. You might, over the years, I've got at least 12 different ways that I share notions of quality with children or with the trainers I'm working with. What happens for people who are not necessarily skilled teachers sometimes, they'll take a method and think, oh, if I do that method, that's all that matters. And actually, you don't equip them with a principle, you equip them with a method, and then they get tied to that one method as though that's the one thing that matters. So the reason I've chosen these 5 is because there's not just, I'm sharing some methods, you know, like the creature of learning or the books or the rules. They're methods, but the principle was make it visible. So these things I'm sharing with you now are principles. You'll come up with many different methods to bring those principles to life. And the more methods you can share with people, obviously don't overwhelm them, the better over time. So we're going to do, this is to me it's the most important of the lot, I think, activating thinking. And I think it's because we all do so many things that people can maybe be busy, but we're not quite sure, because it's invisible, isn't it, thinking? It's going on in people's heads. So people you could be sitting here now, and you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner this evening, and you've got to get your car fixed. I don't know that you're thinking now. It's invisible. You know, occasionally you nod, and you might be nodding to make me happy. But hopefully what I'm trying to do is make you think and provoke thinking through various activities. And that's the hard thing to do, isn't it? So this is my favorite, activating thinking. And it's not going on. There we go. I was asked a little while ago, it was actually in a different country called Lithuania, to do something, helping them develop their textbooks. So I went and got a lot of English textbooks to look at how they worked. And I picked this one up because it was typical of what I saw. And, you know, there was a question. Why do you think Hitler attacked the USSR when he did? And to be really clever, how do I answer that question? I read the paragraph above, and the answer's in the paragraph above. So it'll just say there, you know, Hitler knew that there was danger of the Soviet armies retreating to Russia. He knew winter was dangerous, so that's when he attacked what he did. Now, to me, if that's the level of thinking we're demanding, we're failing miserably in teaching critical thinking and analytical skills. So the textbook might be nice to get the information in one place, but we've got to do a lot more to get people to think than just a little comprehension exercise. Now, textbooks can be much better at that. The reason I put that up there is because I mentioned at the beginning, these days, the amount of information that children get on the web and through social media and through other things, again, I mentioned the recent election, if they can't think critically, if they're not thinking who wrote this for what reason, they're never going to make sense of the world. So we've got to teach them those deeper skills and not just run to the textbook. And just to give you a little bit of theory, again, some work out of Harvard, making thinking visible, some reports recently done, an international survey done at Durham University. Their simple conclusion was that make thinking visible and make people think hard. Learning happens when we think about things, right? And it's partly connected to how the brain works as well. When we think, different things happen. And I put these 3 questions because I always find this is quite helpful as a little self-test. If you go into a classroom and you say to people, what are you doing? Almost everybody can say, oh, we're doing this, we're building this house in the style, or we're making a model, or what we're doing. But if you say, and what are you learning? They'll say, oh, we're building this house. And they say, well, no, you're actually learning something about structures and tensile strength of materials or something else. That's what you're learning, but you're doing is building a model of a house. And even that, first of all, is a step where children, unless you make it explicit, miss the point. and they get happy with their model and forget about strength of structures or whatever it may be you're looking at. Does that make sense? Yeah. But the level also we want to take them to with skills is this bottom, and how are you learning? So they can say things like, actually, I'm learning by carrying out this experiment and observing carefully, or I'm learning by doing a lot of research and synthesizing the key points, or I'm learning through having this discussion and dialogue with people. So they can not just simply articulate the content, they can articulate the process as well. That's really powerful when that happens. Those children we saw, I'm challenging myself, I'm pushing myself forward, I'm not copying, you know, those sorts of things. I read this book a little while ago, and Susan Greenfield is a scientist that studies the human brain, and she describes in this book, for me, some fascinating things about the human brain. You know, we're discovering stuff about it all the time, aren't we? And she talks about a particular experiment. She talks about it's important that we make people think, and this was the experiment. She had somebody playing a piano in a room, and there was a control group who just came in to the room and sat and just listened to the piano. And they looked at the activity in their brains using an MRI scan before and after. I can't remember the exact length of time. It's either 4 or 5 days or 4 or 5 weeks. You have to go with me on this. Then they brought another group in who said, actually, what you're going to do, we're going to listen to the piano player, and then we're going to give you a chance to go on the piano and practice some exercises, you know, just simple exercises on the piano. And they did a pre and post brain scan. And then a third group, they came in and said, what you're going to do is listen to the piano player and imagine yourself playing the piano and doing the exercise. So they didn't touch a piano, but they had to visualize themselves playing the piano. I thought this was a fascinating experiment. And this is what happened with the scans. Look, the top one is where they actually played and practiced. You'd think, wouldn't you, that that would be really, they're really doing it. But look at the middle one, where they visualized what was going on. That was also not as big as actually doing, but really significant. And then the control group at the bottom who just listened, very little change. So the reason I share this is, to me, it really shows the power of thought, the power of thinking, because, you know, basically the more we fire it, the more we wire the brain. And it's thinking that wires the brain, thinking. And because that's where the signals go, and then myelin goes around those channels. So that's some nice evidence there of the power of thinking. This is interesting as well. This is an illustration rather than a scan, but one of those is of an expert musician, and one is of a novice. And the blue is the simulated brain activity of a novice or an expert, right? Which do you think is the expert and which do you think is the novice? Remember, blue signifies mental activity. Which is this side is, this is the expert, and this is the novice. Oh, sorry, the other way. I feel like a game show host. Higher, lower. This is the expert. And that's the novice. This is the other thing that's interesting about skills and fluency, okay? The expert is the one on your left. And the novice is the person on the right. And so let's just take playing the violin. You know, somebody gives you a violin. The first thing you do is try to put it under your chin, and it keeps dropping out, and you can't hold it in your chin. And then you play a bow, and it sounds awful, and you play too hard, and it screeches and wails, and then you play too soft, and you can't hear anything. And your fingers are all going all over the place. You're basically, your entire brain, your cognitive load, is dealing with just day-to-day stuff about managing it. The idea that you're thinking about music, that's a step too far, or interpretation. And the interesting thing about thinking and practice and skills is the more we practice, we achieve a level of fluency and, I can't hardly say this word, automaticity. It becomes automatic that the cognitive load that we have to put into putting it under your chin and holding your fingers becomes absolutely minimal. That's second nature. I don't need to do that. Now, I can use my powers and the outside of your brain where the higher order thinking is taking place to think about, I want to play this with feeling, with emotion. And this is the part that gets really quiet. This is the part that's really loud. And you're thinking about playing the music. So the other powerful thing about what we're doing here is it's no good just talking about skills and making them there. We've got to practice and rehearse them. And some skills we'll want, like literacy, to be totally automatic. If kids are going around sounding out letters and trying to make sense of it, that's really hard because their cognitive load is still at a low level. So a lot of these skills need to be practiced to become fluent and to become automatic, which then frees you up for the deeper critical thinking and the deeper things that you want. So that's an interesting concept as well that matters. This is an American psychologist who's written a book called Why Students Don't Like School, and it's really interesting. And he says they don't like school because they have to think hard, and we don't naturally think hard. Naturally, lots of what we do, believe it or not, is almost automatic, because the way we've evolved is our day-to-day work or thinking becomes routine. I've done this before, it's one of those. It becomes that automatic and fluid. Have you ever driven a car and you've got home and you can't remember getting home? You don't know how you did it, but you got home because you were thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow, you were thinking about the weekend. You certainly weren't thinking about foot on the clutch, into first gear, foot off. You weren't dealing with the day-to-day things. It become automatic. And you've got to force people to think deeply. But that's when learning happens. And he unpicks this, and you can see his most famous quote is, memories are the residue of thought. If you want people to think about, to have memories or skills that stick, they have to think about them a lot. You have to practice them a lot. Now, I know in the training you've done up to now, you did lots of work around higher order questioning and things like that, and dialogic teaching. I'm going to talk today, there's loads of ways you can provoke thinking. The two I'm going to look at are thinking tools and routines. Have you come across those phrases before? Tools for thinking and thinking routines. A thinking routine would be something like plus, minus, interesting. You know, those sorts of things. Or see, think, wonder. This comes out of Harvard. I think it's called Project Zero, I think, where they've got the range of thinking routines. And it's a way to encourage people to slow down and actively think in ways. And the other thing is, research tells us that things called graphic organizers and concept maps really help as well. You know, even a simple Venn diagram makes you think, what's similar, what's different, where do they overlap? You know, it's a powerful tool. You add a third circle, it becomes even more complex. So these are very powerful tools, and research will tell us. You know, I mentioned at the beginning about low, medium, or high impact strategies. Concept tools, or concept maps, graphic organizers come out very high in teaching and learning because they organize thought for people. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to just show you or ask you to use a particular concept map or tool to solve a little problem. That will be our little exercise. I'm going to just tell you about, it's called a causal loop diagram. I don't know if you've ever done one before. Some of you are saying yes. I'm hoping some of you will say no. I'll explain it to you. This was something done. It might actually be very pertinent to Delhi, I think. Our town. And our town has actually really developed over the last few years. And people say, well, what's happening in our town is we've become more industrialized, we're making more money. And that's led to this first thing up here. Oops, my pointer's not working. Increasing demand for cars. I think that's happened over the last 25 years since I came last to Delhi. Increasing demand for cars. But what that's led to is more pollution and poor air quality, amongst many other things. And that's led to more illness. So our town is growing, but actually we're getting ill. And as the town's growing, more food is required. You can see this is another loop going off the top. And that needs to be transported too, which means there's an increasing demand for vans. And so we've created a loop going on, a reinforcing loop, that's making things worse. And these were children trying to explore solutions to problems. So that's the situation. What else can we do? So they started planning other things. And they said, actually, what about if we had more electric trains and buses? That's the first one there. And then there'd be less pollution, then there'd be better health. But then they thought again, actually, then there'd be more demand for electricity. And if you get it wrong right the way round, that's actually more air pollution because we're burning coal and fossil fuels to make more electricity for our cars. So they're mapping complexity here. They're mapping causal loops. Then they said, actually, we've got to seek green energy to get less pollution. So it's just a simple way of seeing connections and cause and effect. Now, if you want people to think deeply, these are why these tools really matter, because the future is hugely complex. And everything you try and do is interdependent. You change this and it affects that and it knocks on this effect. So the idea of mapping out situations matters. I'm going to give you a challenge. You're going to do a causal loop to this little scenario I'm going to show you now. So are you happy to draw a causal loop? I think I might even play the video twice. The first time you can just watch it, and the second time as you're going through it, see if you can draw a causal loop. So make notes the first time through and draw your causal loop the second time round. So let's see. I don't know if you know the Borneo cat story. Apparently this is a true story. Are you ready?
In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasp that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars. Thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained in the geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon the Dayak people were back on the phone to the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time, though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
Do you want to see it one more time, or can you draw a causal loop diagram now? Have a go at doing it now. So see if you can just show some of the relationships and cause and effects there. Think of the characters. Just about 5 minutes, okay? We're only doing it to illustrate the power of these tools. It's really interesting. The other thing is you'll all have, and you all have got, very different maps, first of all. Because some of you are seeing little loops going off. Some of you are seeing it as a very linear type. What was the root cause of the problem? Guys, can we come together? I know you're excited. Let me press the pause button. We'll go back to it. Let's just share some ideas together.
Thinking was done before taking the solution.
Do you think it was lack of thought? Could have been? Foresight? Possibly lack of foresight? What's at the heart of the problem that had this snowball effect? The DDT, the first solution, actually caused more problems, or a different set of problems, than the first thing. Look, this is just an amusing little story to show you the power of beginning to map connections out. Somebody said as I went round to their table, oh, you should have asked us to map out pollution in Delhi and look at the interconnected things there. When we started using some of these tools in another project I was doing, it was all to do with something, I don't know if you ever heard the phrase, wicked problems. Have you come across that phrase? It was quite new to me a few years ago, but it's a phrase they use for like deep, difficult problems to solve, you know, not wicked in a moral sense, but hard to understand because everything's interconnected and you change one thing and it knocks onto something else. When we start looking at the problems we face in the world today, like the Sustainable Development Goals we've got, which are about poverty, economics, environmental things, you know, we find that there's so many things are interconnected. You know, automation can be great, technology can be great, but when it automates jobs away, suddenly it can create prosperity, but poverty at the same time because jobs leave. You know, we can look at water and the need for water on the planet. Do you know how many bottles of water it takes to make a bottle of water? How many bottles of water does it take to make a bottle of water, do you think? 3? I'm not going to give you a specific answer, but you're way off with 3. Let's just shout words. What would the water requirement be for this? Well, the easiest thing is the water inside it. Okay, awfully. Right, how did the bottle get made? Right, melting and molding plastic with machinery. How did the machinery stay cool? How did the machines get made? How did they get this water to us? And you think about the transport and travel. And I don't quote me on this, but I was amazed, because I can't quite remember. But it was something like 30 bottles of water or something was required to make this bottle of water. And that's one of the movements in some cities where they're trying to put water fountains and reusable bottles, things like this, to try and deal with some of the sustainability issues around just drinking water. And we were looking at environmental issues, and one of the biggest uses of water on the planet is actually growing crops. But as water in some parts of the world gets scarce and starts losing it, we have to dig deeper wells for that, which requires more energy, which actually then creates more greenhouse gases, which causes climate change and makes certain areas drier. And you can get into this incredible, difficult loop. But these sorts of tools are ways to show concepts of interdependency. And well, basically, almost any problem is not as simple as we think it is. And I think it's important for young people to understand complexity. And there isn't just a quick fix. And so that's why I particularly like these sorts of tools. Did it make you think? Do you see the value of some of these things? Yeah. Okay, well, we won't do it now, but you might want to think about choosing a real issue and, like somebody said, the pollution in the city, and see how things are interconnected. It'd be really useful. There's, I'm just trying to think of a good way to share some of these thinking tools with this group, because, I mean, you can see a diagram of these sorts of things. You've come across, you know, these sorts of tools are all to do with different processes, linear processes, systems, hierarchical structures. You know, they've all got a different purpose behind them to structure thinking. So you can perhaps even do a search for graphic organizers, and you'll get loads on the web, but they're very powerful things. I'm going to just...
Light on questions, what?
Oh, I'm just jumping back. I just chose these off the web, in terms of various things from that book, making thinking visible, and various routines again. So if you put thinking routines, there's lots of projects out there in various universities that are giving you, well, I mentioned some of these, See, Think, Wonder. I can't remember what question sorts is off the top of my head. But again, it's a technique just to get people to think more deeply about a thinking process. I'm going to share, they've been about critical thinking. I'm just going to share one example around creativity tools, because you said this morning that creativity is one of the hard areas to deal with. And I just came across a set of creative thinking tools that are down on the right. They're called the combination, different, the alphabet alternatives, reverse it, bars. These are all little examples of thinking routines. Let me just take bars, you know. It could be that you've got an idea and you say, I've got this idea. What if we make it bigger? What if there's more of them? What if we make it smaller? What if we adapt it? Or what if we replace something? It's just a little acronym to make people think about possible options. There's different. So, you know, we've got the story, I don't know, of Romeo and Juliet or something like this. And it's taken place in an historical setting with Italian families. Could we tell that story today in India? Who would the families be? Would it be a love story? What would it be if it was in a different setting? If it took place not in medieval times, but in a shopping centre, who would their characters be? You know, so it's a getting a sense of it could be different, but the same. These are just tools to think differently. One of my favourite designers is somebody called Jonathan Ives. And Jonathan Ives designed the original Macintoshes, the iPhone, and all these sorts of things. And the reason I like him is because he describes his creative process. So I remember seeing a picture of this fantastic mouse, you know, that when you used to control computers with mice, and they were all just beige boxes with buttons on. And it came out, and an Apple mouse, it looked like this globule of water sitting on the desk, transparent. It was beautiful. And he described one night playing with ideas and looking at rain falling on his window, and loved the way the rain sat there, the shape and the translucent quality. And we'd take a quality of one thing and infuse it into something else. So I've done really interesting work by sharing the way Jonathan Ives thinks about design, which is taking qualities of one thing and putting them into something else, or combining things, and getting kids to come up with inventions. And it's just that technique of sharing a way of thinking really opens up possibilities. These were to do with design students. Again, some were primary and some were secondary. Have you ever come across this technique? It's random objects. You just pick an object and you pick a different object. In fact, let's see the time. Let's see if we can create an invention today. You're going to do this in pairs, right? Just think of something that you've seen from when you woke up this morning to today. Any object you like at all, right? From when you got up this morning to now. It could be in the room, could be as you were driving here, could be as you were brushing your teeth this morning, anything. Just write it down on a piece of paper. One object. You mustn't think about this, just the first thing that comes into your head, something you've seen. Have you all written something down? Okay, let me just show you what some children have done, and let's just give you 5 minutes to actually change the world with it. Here's two children came up. One came up with a watch. They were looking at a watch, and someone came up with they'd been brushing their teeth in the morning. They didn't have false teeth. They were just brushing their teeth and said teeth, and they thought this was funny. But they were asked to think about the qualities, not the objects themselves, but the qualities. And they were thinking, well, time, seconds moving on, minutes, hours, days, months, a year. They were just play with the object in your head. So it's something to do with time moving on. And then they were thinking about teeth, brushing your teeth regularly, do it in the morning, do it in the evening. And then they'd come across this notion that if you don't brush your teeth for 2 minutes, it's not good enough. You don't get rid of all the plaque. So brush for about 2 minutes. They played with this idea, and they came up with this, which was a toothbrush holder. And they used a computer program to actually make it in plastics. And the way it works is as you go in the morning, you put the toothpaste on your toothbrush, and you press this little button here. And when you press the button, music plays. And it plays for exactly 2 minutes. And so you've got to keep brushing until the music stops. And when the music stops, you put it back. So they came up with this. I thought it was a fantastic idea. And I couldn't believe this. About 6 months ago, I went into a supermarket in the UK, because this is about 10 years ago we did this. And it wasn't a toothbrush holder, but it was actually a toothbrush that had a button on it. And when you pressed the button, it played music. And it was for young children to brush for 2 minutes. So whether they stole this idea or got it somewhere else, I don't know. But that was a really neat example of a blank page, be creative, no chance. Use a technique to stimulate thought, to clash. And here's a really nice one. Light bulb, someone said, or light, whatever they said, a lamp, and a shoe. And they had to, I didn't add this bit, their invention has to do good in society, or good in the world, or good for your health, or good for the city. So I don't know what you would come up with these two, but they thought about shoes, walking, movement. So you've got to think around. It's not, let's put a light bulb on a shoe. That's a daft idea. But they were thinking, is it making sense? Analogies, metaphor, think about shoes, walking, movement, light bulbs, light pollution maybe, causing power. And their invention was street lights with sensors on, because they looked at their street and the lights were on all night, and a lot of the time nobody needed street lights because there was nobody there. And so their invention was, as I walk down the street, the sensor comes on, the light comes on, stays on for 30 seconds, and it turns itself off. And so I just thought that was a really neat idea. This is someone who's 11 came up with this. So it's the quality of the thinking that takes place with a stimulus. So because we've got a little bit of time, let's see if we can come up with an invention today, right? If you come up with a really good invention from your two objects, we'll copyright it and we'll share the profits. Is that all right? Between us. So just the person next to you, if there's 3 of you, if there's not pairs, do this. Just doesn't matter what objects you've got, get together, see if you've got for 2 minutes, if it sparks an invention or a creation, all right? Okay, off you go then. MFI? Did I have that up on the slide?
No. I liked an invention
Okay, let's just hear this one or two invention.
We have thought of a lipstick. The lipstick will have sensors where automatically if the lipstick is getting over, it will pre-order it. It will come to know, it will be like, it will know whether it has to give a matte finish, glossy finish, or creamy finish, depending upon the skin or the weather that is across. And also will be selfies taken with lipstick, so the more likes you get, automatically that lipstick is ordered for us.
Sadly, I actually think that probably would sell. But sensors on the skin, that's probably 5 years away from realization, I think. Yeah, good. Anything tangible? Can you pass the mic over? Let's listen to one more.
The 3 of us over here, I saw a hand in the morning. She saw a yellow cup of tea, and she saw the television. So the name of our product is Lazy Intelligence, and it has the TV screen. The hand will be used. It has a sensor. The minute we just place our hand over there, from wherever on the bed we are, the TV screen switches on, and it gives us around 20 recipes of making tea. So we keep moving our hand, the recipes keep moving. The minute we pause, so suppose we pause at lemon tea, it will give us lemon tea. The TV has an outlet where at night we have placed a cup, and the cup is also placed on a tray which is hand-shaped. So the minute you place your cup there and the tea is poured in it, it just stretches, the hand stretches, and right near your pillow you get your cup of tea. That is why Lazy Intelligent. And our product would look something like this.
Okay, we'll have to look at that product when we leave the room. Leave it on your table and we'll look at it and steal it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to...
Just want to add, in fact, Because of my daughter, I'm now, I view Disney Junior pretty regularly. So this is the Mickey Mouse Club, exactly has this kind of a format with all levers and thing with a big hand, Mickey's hand, and going everywhere. So I absolutely relate with you. That's how you
I know, I can see this has caused some humor and some great ideas. If you think you've got a brilliant idea, just scribble it down and we'll perhaps put them on display at the end, or you can see them somewhere. The point I just wanted to make, just for a bit of fun, there are ways to stimulate and provoke the type of thinking we want, whether it's a causal loop or a Venn diagram or a clash of objects. One thing I'd say, if you're going to do it for real, you can make it fantasy sometime in the future, but if you want kids to make the stuff, it has to be a viable product that they can make as well, like this. And that's where it opens the door into deeper subject learning. So you might be thinking, like this person was, right, now how do I organize a sensor to click and press? They're thinking about electrical circuits to play music for 2 minutes and then stop. So it gets you into some serious learning as well as, you know, the fantasy fun stuff. So if you were doing it for a real task, make that sense. Objects, creativity, and then you almost flip over to disciplined, creative, problem-solving thinking. So you jump between the two. And I've seen some really good stuff going. We had some here, but we'll share those over dinner, right? You can share your inventions there. I'd like to just take you through that last session, and I'm aware of the time. Let me just think. Let me just jump over this a minute. Let's finish the 5 big principles. I'm going to show you a little video clip. And let me just take this a minute. We're going to do some active listening. And what we're going to see is the power of feedback. The power of feedback to bring about significant transformation is what we're going to see. A very simple video clip. These are the 3 things I want you to think about as you're watching the video clip. Again, this is a technique, active thinking, priming you to think. This is the first question, who is offering advice to whom, right? Think about that. Who's offering advice or feedback to whom in this clip? Second thing I want you to think about is what's the nature of the advice that they're offering? What type of advice? And the third thing is, and this is the bit I'll be asking you as we go around, if you took 3 things away from this short video clip, what 3 things would you take as the learning from this clip? You say, oh, there's 3 things worth learning from this clip or worth noticing. And remember, this is one of the principles. We do know, I showed you that little chart at the beginning, didn't I? Right at the top of those high-impact strategies was feedback. If you start getting feedback right, you make really powerful gains in what kids learn. So what would feedback look like around skills? Here we go. Let's have a little look at the clip.
What would you guys say to teachers if they're not getting high-quality work? Could they learn something from this? And what would you say to them that they could do differently in their classrooms?
This is a story called Austin's Butterfly. And it's a true story about a first-grade boy, and his name is Austin, and he goes to school, or used to go to school, in a town called Boise, Idaho. And in his class in Boise, Idaho, they were studying butterflies, and he had to do a project. His job in first grade was to draw a butterfly, and this is the butterfly that he picked. Austin had to use this photograph as his model, and he had to draw an accurate scientific drawing of this butterfly. This is called a tiger swallowtail.
I knew it!
Can you tell, Toby, why it's called tiger?
Because it kind of has the stripes of the tiger right there.
Good. So here was Austin's job. He was supposed to do a scientific drawing of that butterfly. But remember, Austin was only in first grade. And you know what he did? He forgot to look like a scientist carefully. He got his paper and he just started to draw the image of a butterfly that he had in his head. And he wasn't looking like a scientist, and so this is what he drew.
Whoa.
It's not bad, and it is a butterfly, but does it look exactly like this?
No.
No, it doesn't yet. It doesn't look exactly like this yet. Luckily, this wasn't a regular school where Austin went. It was an expeditionary learning school, just like Przemysl School. And so they didn't look at this and say, good, Austin, you're done. They said, Austin, good start. Now we can start giving you critique so you can do a second draft and make it better, and a third draft and make it better, and you can make it much, much closer to this. And he was ready to go. All of the first graders in his critique group sat on the floor like you guys are, and they decided to split their advice into two kinds. First, just the shape of the wings. And then when the shape was right, they'd give him advice about the pattern inside the wings. Alia, what would you say?
You can make it much pointier.
Good. These wings could be much pointier. Who else would add something? Atak, what would you say?
How about the angle? Because, not to be mean about
Yes.
the angle, it's just not exact, so...
Okay, so show me. Come on up here, Atak. Show me what you would ask him to do slightly differently.
Like to make it a little longer.
Longer where? Draw where you would do it.
Right there.
Okay, so pull this out longer.
Yeah.
That's very specific, Atak. Thank you. Jamila, what would you say?
It's like triangle.
Good. Jamila, I love that. So you're saying more like a triangle shape. And I agree. Well, you know what? Those first graders came up with most of those same ideas. And you know what Austin said? He said, okay, I'll go try. And he went back to his seat and he drew this.
Wow.
Does this look more like a triangle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did he go out further, like Atak was suggesting?
Yes. Yeah.
Did he add some jaggedness here?
Yes.
Like Cindy? Did he get rid of that bottom thing?
Yes.
So he did listen to his friends, and he made it better. It's not perfect. Toby, what would you say?
I'd say don't put those little tail things so pointed in. I'd say put them more pointed down.
Good. Okay, and Ethan, what would you say?
I think you should make the wings like this, not like just like
Okay, he listened to his friends, and they said, this is really a lot better, Austin. That second draft really is better.
Yeah, maybe you can make a third one.
Good. Maybe he could make a third draft. And so he did this draft.
That's his third draft.
That's his third draft, Hadley. That's just right. Elijah, what do you notice there?
Well, one wing's more pointed than the other, and that side is a little bit higher than the others.
Good. Coburn?
Right here, it doesn't have the inside thing still.
Ah, okay. Needs a little bit more of that notch. So, do you think maybe he should do a fourth draft?
Yeah.
Well, that's just what he said. He said, shoot, okay, I got round again. I'll go back and do a fourth draft.
Listen.
He listened. Does it look more even like Elijah was suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah, and does it look like it's coming out a little sharper, like Cindy was suggesting? And like Attack was saying, it's a little, the angle looks a little better. So now Austin was feeling really good. He said, am I ready to add some pattern? And they said, okay, why don't you try adding some of the pattern? And he did.
He's good at it. He is so good.
And then they said, Austin, you're ready for color.
Really?
Let's look at his last draft.
Wow.
And what do you think? Did it come out really good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It actually looks well.
Let me show you where he started, just to give you a quick reminder. And then, what do you think about how much progress he made? And Tak, what would you say about his progress?
He made like a lot of progress. He persevered doing it. His friends were honest with him.
What was it about the kinds of advice that they gave that allowed him to get better each time? Hassan?
Well, they told him what was wrong about it.
Did they say it's just wrong, or were they more specific than that?
They were more specific, but they weren't mean about it.
Great.
He
Hadley.
made 6 drafts.
And so is that something that other kids should learn from? What should we learn from that?
He can make other drafts if it's not right.
Good. So if it's not right, you can keep doing more drafts to make it better.
You just don't use things in your head. You want to use a sharp eye.
Good. He used the eyes of a scientist. Great.
Beautiful work. And he will say, beautiful work doesn't come easy. Beautiful work requires effort, redrafting, working at something. And before he starts often, I don't know, say we're doing some writing, he would make sure there's loads of examples of good writing on the table, and they'll spend an appreciative half an hour reading other people's writing from last year or the year before, or from maybe written in the public or a different school. So they've got a sense before they begin, oh right, that's where we're aiming for, that's beautiful work. And then his other big word is craftsmanship. And craftsmanship comes with effort and trying and being careful. So he will say, this week we're writing a letter to the local councillor to ask for something change in our community. We'll probably have to write 4 or 5 letters, because it's got to be good, because it's going to go off. So your first draft won't be the best one. The expectation is if it's going to be beautiful, you're going to create some drafts. Now, to me, it was a very inspirational book, and then I came across this video and thought, that really captures what the book's about. Now, the questions I asked you to think about, and these are significant, okay? Who's offering the advice to whom? Right. Is that significant? Why is it significant? Potentially non-threatening, or it could be, mind, if all your peers are saying, oh, it's not good enough to do this, but there was something about a few of them said. Not mean, but not mean. We're trying to help them, yeah, not mean. So they'd obviously created a culture and climate that feedback, or critique as he calls it, is about us all getting better collectively. It wasn't we're picking on you because it's not very good. So that climate for learning mattered as well. So you're not mean. Why do you think it wasn't the teacher saying, go away and do that and make it better if you do this? What was the power in having the students offer feedback?
The students were more observant in that way. Very specific realization.
Right, they were very observant. That's the point. What I think is they're learning through offering the critique. The person learning is not just the person receiving the critique. They're all learning because they're thinking, oh, it's more like a triangle. Oh, well done, yeah, triangle, good shape. It needs to be pointed. So they're thinking as well. It's not just the teacher doing the thinking in the room. Everybody's doing the thinking in the room. Everybody's looking to help somebody make something beautiful. You know, and I think that's really powerful. When you talk about peer review and peer critique, that's another one of the things that comes out really highly from research. That if you try and help and support each other, it's a really useful strategy. Sorry, you've got your hand up. Say it nice and loud so I can hear.
From the second picture, he forgot his name because the contributive efforts are there.
I didn't hear you, sorry. Can you say it?
From the second picture, yes, he is not writing his name.
He's not right. This clip, by the way, if you do want to find it on YouTube, it's just called Austin's Butterfly, and you can find it on YouTube, and it's a really nice, powerful little clip. Something about the nature of the feedback. I think I heard somebody on this table say it. He sort of tries to make the point at the end, doesn't he? Was it just, it's not very good, go and make it better? Very, very specific. And that matters. How do you take the next step? Small steps. Let's just concentrate on this first. Let's concentrate on that. Remember I showed you that picture with the cognitive load thing, with the expert and the novice? The novice is thinking about so many things at them all the time. They can't focus on the higher order thinking skills. What they're trying to do by condensing it, let's just think about the shape. They're stopping them to think about the color, the pattern, and all this. We're going to take it step by step and fix one thing at a time. That matters as well. Deconstructing the task and breaking it down. We've got the nature of advice. If we were going to take away 3 things from that 5-minute clip, what would we say were the 3 big ideas you would take away from this today? Well, you would say the importance of perseverance, creating that climate. I love the thing where he could make another draft. Oh, he could make another draft. You know, they're not starting with, as we do in many, this is my first attempt, and that's it. Or this is my first attempt, and it's wrong. They start with this premise that you'll do 3 or 4 attempts to get it to look beautiful. It really matters that.
allow this sense of feedback and also work on it.
That's right. So he didn't just give up, he did persevere, because again, the climate was, this is how you make things, you know, in using Ron Burgess things, this is how you make things beautiful, this is how you get high quality. You know, you practice.
Observation and eye for detail.
Okay, so that was that, about being very specific. So they were all observing carefully. You know, some are going, oh, the notch is not right. Oh, it's the wrong angle. Oh, it should be this shape. You know, everybody's alert to making it better. Sorry. Let me.
In a non-judgmental environment.
That's really important. Say it again for everybody. Just say that again.
The teacher has to create a non-threatening and a non-judgmental environment for a child to give and receive feedback.
And that, you know, that's so key. We've talked about it a lot today, isn't it? The climate we create in classrooms. If all we ever think about is it right or wrong, that really makes it very difficult for people to try things and get things wrong. You know, you've got to get that climate. It's a bit, going back to that other one, we challenge ourselves. You know, Mr. X would be more surprised if I got everything right than everything wrong. That's about climate building in classrooms, about feedback.
Learning through feedback.
4 A's of the feedback, that is active listening, admiring, acknowledging efforts, and giving small pieces of advice. So 4 A's of feedback.
I really like that, the 4 A's. I like little things that you can remember there. That's really nice. 4 A's, it just fit in with it. Too much feedback is seen by too many people as judgment at the end of something. And one of the things I'm going to show you when we talked about the lesson planning is if on that section that just talks about assessment, that it's only summative assessment, how well did you do, you're missing the learning by having feedback running through all the activities. It's no good just having feedback when it's all over. There's nothing you can do about it. You need the feedback running through it, formative feedback, to shape the next step. Then feedback makes learning better. So just thinking about how will I assess at the end might need to happen, because you want to see if the lesson worked or the unit of work worked. But you should also be thinking about assessment opportunities. Remember I said press pause. What's going on here?
Feed forward.
Feed forward, absolutely.
And also the student talk time, because generally when the feedback starts, it's only the teacher talk time. Here it was the student talk time and the teacher.
Every child was involved. The teacher did not come forward, called out and asked for their feedback as well.
That's right. He was asking everybody to participate.
Every child got an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I think that the power lies with the student, for a teacher to accept that the student has the power to evaluate rather than the teacher. So for a teacher to accept that is...
I think this is an example, you're absolutely right, where it's quite easy for students to observe carefully and offer advice. There will be things where students have to have the knowledge to offer the feedback, more complex things. And you can imagine this in a secondary school, where you do want this dynamic happening, but there obviously needs to be quite a lot of teaching and instruction so they can offer meaningful feedback. But I wanted to show you this because it's so visual and it makes the point of creating that climate for feedback. I'm aware that we've got about 7 or 8 minutes
One last point, can I
left.
say?
Sorry, who's got
Just
the
one
mic?
last point.
Okay, yeah.
What I really liked about the video was when the children were giving their suggestions, and when they could see the butterfly come out finally to the shape it was expected to be, the joy that the children experienced.
I love that. Yeah.
I think that was really very important, which we should notice.
I think that's a really powerful point, that celebration and joy. Because all the way through, you can just hear, can't you, in the background going, oh, and then make, oh, I knew it, he said at the beginning when it was a thing. And then, oh, he's brilliant, he's fantastic. You know, that was lovely. That's lovely. That sort of collaborative celebration of learning as well. Yeah, I just think that was, it has so many powerful points in it, that video. That's what you've just done, okay? This is just another thing I wanted to share around those creatures at the very beginning. One of the things another school did was, at the end of a piece of work, they'd say, right, we've got these cards we've created. Put an X if you think you've shown this in this work. And again, it was just making it visible, not particularly about quality, but yeah, we have been observing and recording accurately. So we got a tick there, and they were building profiles up of the way they're looking. I'm going to jump to the last one now, making connections. We all create mental maps of the world when we learn things, you know, and they just happen naturally. And what we're trying to do in education is help develop more effective mental maps. They're called schema. You've probably come across that word. We all create schema from experiences, yes. And sometimes schema. It comes from Piaget, I think. I'm not quite sure, but that whole notion of mental maps, yeah? Let me try and give you an example. One won't pop into my head now. We could go right back to that first exercise we did today, you know. One of the things you could have, if you have a very, I suppose, shallow mental map of images and artwork, you might just say something like, oh, I like it or I don't like it, and it's about personal taste or something like that. So my understanding of art is personal taste. As you get the language of art, you might say, oh, I can see how this person has used color symbolically. It's red and it's violent and it's suggesting this. And so you've got a different schema because you're thinking about symbolism and that lines, shapes, colors can mean something beyond their surface. Or you saw that light bulb with the explosion and the eye. Exactly what Picasso was trying to get at. This is an eye. What he was saying is, this has been a terrible atrocity. It's been seen by the world. We've seen this. You're not going to get away with it. My painting is the eye. This is terrible. And this is making me angry, which is like an explosion, you know, and the light, the bare bulb of, you know, that often associated with, I don't know, that image. So he's playing at another level with symbolism and meaning. You could also, if you were going into art, have a notion that art across time has meant different things. You know, from the earliest cave paintings that people did, you know, you could go through art history and have a perspective, and, you know, I can only talk mainly about Western art, but you might talk about the Renaissance and what that was symbolizing, and then why did the Impressionists come up when photography came? Because they realized there's no point just painting realistic, we need to add something because we can take a photograph, so they used color in different ways, and we've got to add another layer of meaning. So you can see an historical perspective. You could say that, you know, artists today are not trying to do any of that. They're almost trying to shock and make society look at itself in different ways. Now, as you learn more, your schema, your understanding of what art is, gets deeper and deeper and deeper. I can look historically. I can look technically. You know, why is blue in paintings in the Middle Ages? I didn't know this initially, but blue is a very rare color because you couldn't get blue. So blue was used to show wealth or royalty or you know, spirituality in that sense in religious paintings. So you might know something about the technical art. There's another schema I've got, the difference between printing and painting and sculpture. Just making sense. So I've got a slide that tries to show this. When you look at novices and when people are young, they know facts and they gather information. And they begin just to connect facts. But for many of them, it's just a series of facts. Or it might just be, I've got a linear sense of the historical perspective. So a young schemer, a novice, will look like this. But we're moving children from being novices to being experts. And it's obviously not, it doesn't happen in a lesson. It doesn't happen in a year. It happens in 15 years or more, you know, 20 years of learning. And we do it all our lives. Our schema are developing. If you don't think about making connections and making them explicit, we don't necessarily help people have a deeper understanding. It's just more and more facts. And let's leave it for people to develop their own understanding. Now, what I'm arguing, and when you look at the difference between experts and novices, is knowledge matters, but you have to connect that knowledge in all sorts of different ways. And the more you make those connections explicit, the more people can use that knowledge productively to do other things. So that's the theory. Little examples. I showed you that making thinking visible. There's a guy called Professor, I think it's David Perkins from Harvard. He is taught certain things to do with chemistry and nutrition. And one of his projects was teaching the content in topics to a group. So I'm going to teach you all about nutrition now. I'm going to teach you about, I don't know, water purification or something like this, and 3 or 4 things to do with science and chemistry to older students. He taught exactly the same content to another group, but in the context of a problem. You've been in a plane crash, you've dropped into the jungle, you've got to know what water's safe to drink, you've got to know what's edible and nutritious. How will you do it? What experiments might you be able to do? Exactly the same content, but one had a context, you know, that was made up, but it was a real context. When they came to test the students at the end of it, in the test of knowledge, the students who were taught separately and explicitly got 1 set of marks, and the students who were taught in the context got exactly the same marks. There was no difference. They'd acquired the same knowledge. His second step was then to give people another real-life scenario that in this case wasn't a jungle or something like this. It might have been a desert scenario or something where people had to use this. And those that were taught in a context were able to apply their knowledge far better to the context and the real-life scenario than those who'd been taught it. So their knowledge was the same. Their ability to apply it and transfer was very different. And that's the big challenge in education, transfer. So rich context for learning and making connections matter. And what you see is, at a very basic level, experts also have hierarchical structures. So as they learn new things, they think, oh, that fits in here. They've got a placeholder for it. So it's not just another fact that I've got to try and remember. I can place this fact somewhere, wherever it is. It might be about biology, nutrition, or it sits there comfortably. I can do that. But what happens with real experts is they have multiple ways of connecting things. So you might see someone, you know, a real expert that's got something looking like this, but they can also lay it and have a sort of connection that says, oh, I can connect those together in a different schema. That might be the historical perspective, or that might be the technological perspective as well as the hierarchical. Or, in fact, this might be the perspective that links it to real-life situations or links it to cultural context. So their expertise is starting to make a network in lots of ways. And so my last point is that can happen by accident. Or like teachers, how do you make it teachable? You make it visible, and you start sharing some of those potential connections. And if you make that, we could look at this historically. We could look at this technologically. We could look at this in relation to something in your life outside school. Or there's this occupation that uses these strategies or these core skills. You know, if you want to work in any business, I'm telling you, you need to be a team player. That's how the world works. So this isn't something I'm telling you to do, you know, on a Thursday afternoon. This is something that's connected to real life. Susan, you were telling me about a school earlier, weren't you? Where they were, the school you visited, Pimlico, with...
Oh, Pimlico, yeah.
Just tell people how they connect in it with employment and things.
So Pimlico Academy is a school in London. It's a secondary school. Now I've got my big loud So Pimlico Academy is a secondary school in London. It serves quite a deprived population, and one of the things that they have recently invested in, if you imagine, you know, in your schools you typically get like a head teacher and then teachers, etc. But this school has invested in what they're calling a director of raising aspiration. Okay, and that person, I know it sounds a bit funny, doesn't it? But that person is there to inspire in each and every child to raise their aspirations. And what I particularly liked about it is that in England at the moment, there's a bit of a strange narrative going on which says, you will be judged a success if you get to university. Okay? And most people think that actually not all children need to go to university, that children have a very, very wide and varied talent set. But, and so what this lady was telling me was that she had high aspirations of whatever ambition a child might have. So it wasn't as if she said, well, you've got high aspirations, you want to go to university, and you want to be a hairdresser. Okay, you go and be a hairdresser, that's fine. Okay? What she was saying is, I want you to have a high aspiration in terms of being going to university. But if you want to be a hairdresser, I want you to be the next Vidal Sassoon or the next Charles Worthington. I don't want you to aim to work in, a shop, and be. I want you to have really high aspirations for yourself in whatever your chosen career, whether it was vocational or whether it was academic. And I really liked that because in England there's a real kind of, it's either academy or you're slightly kind of, you go and do something vocational. But they're not the same levels of aspiration for the different paths, and I just thought that was really exciting. They were also, part of the entitlement of every young person is that in year 7 or 8, so when you're 11 or 12, you will already be taken into businesses, and you'll meet people who are doing particular jobs. You'll be taken to a lecture, which is being done at the School of Dentistry, or whatever it is, but you'll start to make those connections so that when you go back into school and you think, right, I want to be a hairdresser, but I want to be the next Vidal Sassoon, and therefore I need to make sure that with my maths I can run a effective business. I understand how to do that. I know that I need to be good at collaboration and communication because I'm going to have to build those relationships with my stakeholders and my customers, etc. I'm going to need to have good literacy skills so I can do my publicity. And it was linking it together with these aspirations that made this school, I thought, a really inspirational place to visit.
And I just heard that story and thought, that's got to be more schools doing stuff like that, definitely. Which brings me to my last slide, and I'm going to set this for a bit of homework for you, right? Not to do now, because we're getting to the end of the day. Remember, you're going to get this slide. I think it's really helpful for us to actually make explicit connections, because we're saying, we're going out to schools saying, these core skills really matter. Come on, do this. Now, I think we need to be able to fill in each of these boxes. We should be able to write in the middle, collaboration. And we should be able to say, how will collaboration help in my subject teaching? So that could be talking to physics teachers or art teachers or whatever teachers. How will collaboration help? How will it help me as a citizen in my real life, in my community, where I live, with my parents, with my family, or in the town I am? Give me a concrete example from the real world. It's almost echoing what Susan said here. You're mapping the connections. Tell me how technology might help with collaboration. How is WhatsApp going to help me be a teacher? If there was a job, where have you used it in your own job as a collaborative experience? I want it on the tip of my tongue. Is this making sense? I'm asking you to think about creating schemas. Where have you used it in the past? Now, that's a nice thing to do with teachers who you're trying to say, these things matter. Because if you can say, that's where creativity matters, that's where entrepreneurship matters, that's where student leadership matters, that's where having a global perspective matters, people are beginning to see the significance of the work we're doing. And it's not just the latest fad or fashion or something that someone's imposing on us. This is something real that makes a difference. And that's why it matters. So I'm going to finish with my last slide, which, if I was talking about the whole curriculum, I often talk about future-focused curriculum. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow. Because all curriculum has to deal with 3 things: past, present, and future. The past really matters, because we need to introduce children to the great thoughts that have been had, our understanding of the world. Of course it matters that we understand our heritage, our past, the great inventions, the great poets, whatever thing. But it also has got to matter in the present, to my life now. How does this help me now? What does it mean when I go home? What does it mean in my job? But also, we've got to equip them to be future-focused in that uncertain world where things are changing rapidly, where we don't know what the future's going to hold. But if we're adaptable, if we're creative, if we can be collaborative, if we can do those things, we've got a chance of flourishing and thriving. So to me, being fit for the future means all those things. So as you talk about the curriculum, of course, knowledge matters. We've just talked about schema. It matters. Without the knowledge, you can't create more sophisticated schemas. Or if you're not creating that understanding, you're also just learning more and more facts as though it's for a quiz or something. You've got to create schemas that can be applied. You definitely need to have skills. We've heard it today, you need to be literate and numerate. But you do need all these other skills as well. You do need all the ones we've talked about today. we talked about attitudes and beliefs. You know, an attitude is, I'm going to stick at this, I'm going to be resilient. I can't, you know, that positive attitude, I'll give it a go. You know, these are not facts or skills, they're attitudes. So a curriculum's got to have an attitude as well. And having skills tends to develop positive attitudes. If you think, I can do this, I can communicate clearly, start feeling confident. And the last one I add that you sometimes don't see, and it really matters to me, is agency. And that means that I can make a difference in my own life. I can make a difference in the community I live in. And if enough of us leave school being knowledgeable, skillful, having positive attitudes, and a sense of making a difference, we can make a difference in the world. So thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to meet you again sometime. Thank you.